Hello and welcome to Earth Calling. We're your hosts, Ed and Lazlo. Every week we bring you a fresh slice of online content, sorting through the likes, the memes, the insta-Queens, the swipes, the scrolls, and the Twitter trolls. Together, we're laying down our 21st century digital legacy. So sit back, relax, and buckle in. This is Earth Calling.
Welcome back, Earth Callers. Thanks again for tuning in. This week, we are taking our trusty hard drive, which is increasingly full, let's be honest. I don't know how many terabytes we bought, Ed, actually. Maybe we didn't think quite that much about, our capacity.
I think
10 terabytes?
Yeah, 10 terabytes. Well, how many episodes have we done now? This is for 14 or 15. But I think we're still very much in the megabyte world. We're not troubling the terabytes. Although perhaps we'll have to upload the videos, which we should actually start doing. We should upload the videos of these.
And this week we thought we would have a look at a platform that everyone is familiar with, because that platform has basically taken over the world of communication in the last year and a half during this pandemic. That platform is, of course, Zoom video communications. Let's get it trending. It doesn't need to go trending. It's very much already trending.
Absolutely, exactly. So today we're talking Zoom and the transformative impact it has had on many of our lives throughout the past 18 months, or indeed, I suppose about a year, coming up to the year anniversary. It feels like 18 months, but it's quite an incredible platform which has enabled us all to communicate throughout the pandemic. And as always, I thought, as though I would give a little brief synopsis of Zoom and how it came to be. And it's actually a very interesting story, one of grit and determination, as is so often the case with our social media platforms and how they came into existence. So Zoom was founded by a guy called Eric Yuan, who is originally from China, and in the 1990s, so, oh my god, 90s, he watched Bill Gates talking about the internet. And as I said, he was based in China and was in his 20s, and having watched this speech, he was inspired, and he decided that his dream was to go to the US and go to Silicon Valley. And he started applying for visas to get into the US. And as people know, and as has become increasingly difficult in the Trump administration, it's very tricky to get a visa. And he actually ended up applying 8 times to try and get admitted to the US, this guy. And finally, after struggling for 2 years, he got his visa on the 9th occasion and made it to the States in 1997. Now, he didn't really speak fluent English, but he was extremely good at coding. And so he arrived in Silicon Valley and was welcomed into the fold as an extremely good coder and started working for a company called Cisco WebEx. Now, I don't know whether you've come across WebEx, Lazlo.
I think that reminds me of some kind of... I've definitely seen a Cisco pop-up on some computer that I've used in the past. I don't know if it was at my school. I just remember finding it bloody annoying and closing it immediately.
Well, I'm very glad that you say that, because you're quite right in some ways. It was a precursor to Zoom and is a very clunky piece of meeting software that was used by lots of big businesses. And he started working there. And, by 2007, the company was worth X billion. And Yuan got increasingly frustrated because whenever he talked to customers, e.g. you, everyone was like, dude, this sucks. This is just like a shit platform. And so he got the idea to develop something that didn't suck and did the same thing, but just way better. And so that's how he founded Zoom. And he kind of poached about 30 people from Cisco WebEx to take with him. And lo and behold, it started taking off purely because it was a better user experience. And it started growing and really hit its stride, obviously, last year. And just to give some context, so in December 2019, so pre-pandemic, in those blissful days where we had no idea.
Pre-pandemic? What is this? What is this time you speak of?
Exactly, the halcyon days, the prelapsarian, pre-pandemic days.
Prelapsarian, very good.
Yes.
That refers to the fall of
of man.
The fall of man, the Garden of Eden
man.
stuff. Don't eat the apple, bloody hell.
If there's a talking snake that comes up to you, he's a lying bugger, just ignore him.
There's plenty of nice fruit. Look at the blueberries. They're very bloody tasty. Or take a pear. Take a pear from the pear tree. Just don't take the bloody...
We won't go down the Genesis story, but there's a lot of gold to be had there. Ricky Gervais does a brilliant routine where he talks about how these God's doling out the punishments and says to man, you're going to have to toil the earth for the rest of your days, and Eve, womankind will have to endure the terrible pain of childbirth, and comes to the snake. Let's bear this in mind: the snake who fucked everything up, and goes. You, Master Snake, you will crawl on your belly for all your days. And the snake goes, not really a punishment for a snake. I mean...
Yeah, well, exactly.
I already
do.
Anyway,
if you told me I had to go around doing cartwheels my whole life, that might be slightly different.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus, I wish I could fly like normal. Yeah, anyway, but... So back in those prelapsarian days of the pre-pandemic era, Zoom had 10 million users a day. 10 million, nothing to be sniffed at. Certainly, that's the size of Sweden logging in daily. I think Sweden's about 9 million. And they were bumbling along very well.
I just want to connect to my family in Tromsø, which is actually in Norway, isn't it? Come to think of it. Okay, sorry. I just want to connect with my family in Göteborg.
In Göteborg?
In Göteborg. Ah, Mama, you have taken the pintry inside. Got bad there, yeah, sorry. How is Papa's gravidax?
But anyway, so all of Sweden was using Zoom at the end of December 2019, and then months later in March, they had 200 million daily users, which is kind of crazy. So 20x in the space of a couple of months must have been bloody difficult keeping up with that. And 200 million, that is the population of Russia. Mm-hmm. So basically Russia plus Sweden, because I think Russia's 180. So a lot of people logging in, and that led to, of course, security concerns, people Zoom bombing, where you'd get a class full of kids and then someone would just bomb in and just start swearing and making lewd remarks. So they've had a meteoric rise, which has not been without pain, but we have come to rely on it, and I've been very, very happy to have Zoom as a crutch. I mean, imagine if we'd had this pandemic before Zoom.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say now, everyone, and I don't want to boast or anything, but I was actually a very early adopter of Zoom. I was definitely among the Sweden population of people using it, and even before then. I'd say I started using it in around 2016 when I was teaching English remotely. And I just remember sending off Zoom links to potential clients or people that I had to have a trial lesson with. And they would inevitably get back to me being like, what is Zoom? How do I... do you have Skype? I'm like, God, you'll see. You'll see.
Yeah,
when this world is stricken by a terrible viral disease, that's when you'll see. Yeah, you're right. It's become this amazing crutch to lean on. I think it's also so universal that everyone now knows, about the complexities and the different potential outcomes of Zoom meetings and whether they are funny or quite tragic.
I think as well, though, if you imagine this pandemic happening in 2005, when everybody's literally at home with a brick Nokia that they can play Snake on, I mean, it literally would have been a disaster. The internet wasn't at a point where you could entertain yourself using Instagram, TikTok, watching Netflix, it really would have been a very different setup. And so, yeah, in a way...
Yeah, I think not to go too philosophical on this, but I actually think that it's not necessarily... We can't really say that it would have been a disaster with hindsight. I think humans are infinitely adaptable, and humans can, find things to do in all sorts of situations. And so Zoom has obviously helped us, remain connected with people we love and with, our work, and... it's given us this kind of social outlet, but I don't know. I also think that it's on the downside. It means that we're glued to a screen a lot, and I'm sure people can relate to the idea of Zoom fatigue, which is this feeling of just being very over remote meetings and them actually draining you to the point of just inertia afterwards.
For sure, but I mean, what would you have been glued to in 2005? There's nothing else to be glued to. It's not like you're out and about. You're bored out of your mind.
Not at all. I mean, boredom is not the worst thing that you can experience. Boredom is actually quite a privilege, I think. To be bored and to have possibilities to express yourself, whether that be creatively or intellectually, reading a book, making something out of papier-mâché or whatever. I think they do say, yeah, shout out to papier-mâché. Thank you very much for sponsoring this episode of Earth Calling. I think humans always find things to do, and it's having screens now as our first port of call is merely a kind of convenience that we found.
Well, all I can say is that I'm glad I'm on Instagram and TikTok rather than playing marbles or outside with a couple of twigs in the garden. But we digress, as always. And so I think that gives a brief and hopefully useful synopsis of how Zoom zoomed to where it is today, reaching new heights. And Lazlo, I think you want to bring a particular example to the listeners today.
Absolutely, I do. And I think the best place to start is with a recent dramatic event. And by dramatic, I mean it in the truest sense. Quite a piece of artwork, basically, a play that somehow rolled out over Zoom. And I'm referring, of course, to the famous parish council meeting of Hanford and the presiding temporary council meeting holder, should we call them, Jackie Weaver, who has since kind of soared to recognition in the UK.
Now, shall I just pause? I'll just pause there just to give a little bit of context to perhaps some of our non-UK listeners. I'm not sure how far Jackie Weaver and her Zoom meeting have gone. I hope they've gone global, but essentially this was a parish council meeting, which essentially means a bunch of locals who are very interested in the upkeep.
Well, hang on. Yeah, when you say a bunch of locals, let's be honest. They're a bunch of quite old men and women. They're not. It's not kind of like the 16, 17-year-old politically motivated teens.
No, so typically these parish council members are sometimes older members of the community who are interested in its upkeep, and one of their meetings descended into a bit of a fracas, shall we say, and has subsequently gone viral. And Lazlo, why don't you set the scene and walk us through what happened?
Well, in this 2-minute clip, which I implore you all to research and watch, you see a meeting recorded in speaker view, which means that whoever's making the most noise basically is the person that the camera turns to. And it's utter chaos because this lady, Jackie Weaver, who's been called in to host this meeting, and it's just utter chaos because the chairman's there. He refuses to acknowledge Jackie Weaver as being the host of the meeting, but she, of course, wields all the power. So you've got this chairman who's saying, "You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. None at all."
and then she just removes him from the meeting, doesn't she? And then there's the other guy who's on. It just says Alid's iPad. It's like, well, hang on, who's Alid?
Yeah,
and that's a strange name. And he gets very cross.
There's two people on Alid's iPad, and whether or not it's Alid himself, but he's just saying, she just kicked him out.
Yeah, she's kicked him out.
She kicked it out. And it's funny because the person to the right on Alid's iPad, you can only see their chin, but it's a very active chin. It's kind of going, what?
Yeah, trying to calm down Alid, isn't he? So whether it's Alid or not, saying, no, stop it, don't. And then Alid
Alid
you can't do
very
that.
Mobile on the couch.
Yeah, and then says something like, "I'm the deputy, I take charge." Read the standing orders. Read them and understand.
That's
So good. Yeah. But then there's a random guy. You see this other sort of. So those are the key protagonists in this wonderful drama, and we call it probably is it a tragedy or a comedy? It's probably a tragicomedy.
It's a tragicomedy.
And you see these are the three. So you got Alid, you got Jackie, and you've got the original kind of was it the counsellor? Anyway, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And then you have this cast of other characters, including a man named John Smith, who for some reason is not on mute, but just is cackling away. And so on the speaker view, you just see him going, but it's chaos. But it was extremely amusing, and I do encourage everybody who hasn't seen it to Google it and take a look. Perhaps we'll include a link in the show notes. Another fantastic example that has exploded over the past couple of weeks, which again I'm sure that virtually everybody listening will be familiar with, was of course the lawyer who was, I think, based in Texas, who dialed into a courtroom meeting, but unfortunately had his cat filter switched on to his Zoom, and the most hilarious thing ensued, whereby he was trying to explain that he was fixing it and his assistant was there, and then this completely absurd, I mean, it just really underlined the absurd times that we're living in, where you had one of the judges say, "I think you have a filter on there," and he said, "Yeah, I know, Judge. I got my assistant here. We're trying to work it out." And then he has this fantastic line where he goes, "I can't seem to fix it, but I'm here live, Your Honor, and I'm happy to go forward with it. I'm not a cat."
And then the judge just goes, "I can see that."
Well, the beauty of it is, of course, that he can't see that. For all intents and purposes, he is talking to quite a forlorn-looking cat.
The cat looks so forlorn, and I have to say the filter is very, very realistic, in that the mouth of the cat actually moves with the lawyer's mouth. My favourite part is actually the very first sound that the guy makes when the judge has pointed out. It's like, "You seem to have some kind of filter turned on." The guy just goes, "Ah." It just makes this kind of. He's like, I can see that.
It's amazing. Yeah, so that's obviously subsequently gone viral, and that judge has been interviewed, and I think he has now subsequently fixed the filter. And in fact, having done a little bit more digging, it wasn't just these judges who have fallen foul of the kind of filter settings. In fact, there have been a couple of other great examples, one of which was an Italian priest who, way back in the beginning of all of this, back in March, April 2020, when, let's not forget, things were looking absolutely awful in Italy, and this priest
Did he have his Pope filter on?
Well, he didn't have the Pope filter on, which would have perhaps been blasphemous, but he instead he was broadcasting live on Snapchat and had a sort of filter cycle going through, and so there he was delivering this mass in Italian, and on the one hand he suddenly had kind of gangster glasses and a joint sticking out of his mouth. The next moment he had a sort of spaceship helmet on, all the while kind of trying to make a quite sincere homily, and you can see that he's watching himself just mortified and doesn't know whether to try and sort of stop and then switch it. And the other one I wanted to briefly mention was a very high-powered boss, I think at a consulting firm, something like KPMG or whatever, who she essentially came on as a potato and couldn't get rid of it, and so slightly lost the gravitas. But they all just ploughed on ahead with the meeting.
Yes, filters are, of course, the ultimate downfall of any serious businessman these days. And I think, Ed, it could be wise to talk about some of the personalities and characters that we all know and love from video calls. I think you've actually dug up some of these, haven't you?
Absolutely, and I think, over the past year, we've got very familiar with certain stereotypes of the sorts of people that you'll get on your Zoom meetings. And so, yes, I thought it might be fun to just run through a few of these. The first is, of course, the person who is always on mute. And at the beginning of every meeting, it's almost the boring one, but, it has to be called out because it's absolutely infuriating, where the meeting will start and someone will say, "Oh, Michael, have you got the numbers on you?" And then Michael will be sort of mouthing his response and go, "Oh, sorry guys, I was on mute." It's like, yes, Michael, we know you're on mute because we were literally just watching your mouth move and no sound was coming out. And
I think that's probably number one in the least necessary statements to make on a Zoom call. I was on mute. It's like, oh, you were on mute. Okay, cool. So you weren't just miming with your camera, with your microphone switched on. Got it.
Got it. Cheers, Mike. So no, that was the first one that sprung to mind. I think, there are several others. Two that I would like to call out are semi-linked, and those are the person that always seems to have a pet, often a dog, in the Zoom, and the other is the children who feature in the Zoom. So often someone will be like, "Oh my god, this is my cat, and he's a little bit grouchy today, but it's okay because he hasn't had his biscuits, and he's going to be a little bit more charming later, aren't you, Mr. Tickles?" And you're like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, Mr. Tickles just looks pretty bored, to be honest.
And of course, you can't be sure that Mr. Tickles isn't in fact a judge in disguise. Mr. Tickles is in fact a Texas judge.
Yeah.
I'm not a cat. By the way, there's a fantastic comment on the I'm not a cat video with a guy just saying, who writes on the YouTube video, just says, sounds like something a cat would say.
And yeah, just impossible to gauge whether he was or was not a cat. But you have the friends or colleagues who will often brandish their dogs or cats. And to be honest, I'm not saying that any of these are necessarily a bad thing. Mute is extremely irritating, but cat and dog and kids, they're quite good. Like the kids are pretty funny because it's like, oh, everybody say hello to Tom, and then Tom's like sort of shouting, basically screaming that he wants to have his dinner because he's of course a 3-year-old toddler, and that's what 3-year-old toddlers do. And it's like, oh, can we get the quarterly earnings report? Daddy, give me my fish fingers. It's like, oh, And actually, I have to say, watching some of these Zoom interactions, I do feel very glad and very #blessed that I'm not at home with a family of three.
Absolutely. I mean, my dear colleagues, love them all. They're great. A few of them have children, and in the moments where they aren't on mute, and therefore their microphone is very much out in the open in their flat, you do just hear, they're trying to say something like, so of course, it's very important that we hit our quarterly.
Exactly.
I've probably just broken my own microphone there doing that squeal.
Apologies to the eardrum popping.
Yeah. But it really is. I totally agree with you. To be a parent in these days, wow! I honestly tip my hat to you, because that is just a very, very tricky, very. It must just be unbelievably tiring. You're doing your full-time job. You're homeschooling. You're wearing every single hat under the sun. Yeah. And you don't get paid for it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think hats off for sure, because it's bloody tough. This next one, though, is a bit more niche, but I think if we actually consider it, we are all familiar with somebody who does do this. And this is somebody who clearly is just staring at themselves on the Zoom. So, how you can have like different views, and one of them is like everybody's in the gallery, one of them is sort of you when you're speaking, but etc., etc. There are those people who are just not quite looking at the center of the camera. They're just like looking slightly off to the right, because that's where they are. And I'd like to call these people, I think this is kind of the Narcissus character, named, of course, after the Greek character who fell in love with his own reflection in the pond, and was so upset that he could never be with himself that he died. And hence where we get the word narcissist, actually, isn't it? But so yes, there's definitely the narcissi on these calls.
Do you think some of these narcissi, they just kind of pin their own video and just
kind
of like, it's like their whole desktop is just a mirror, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd also like to maybe propose a sub character here, which is not the person looking at themselves, but the person who's clearly got, to their left, their small little laptop, which is, the webcam's pointing at them, and then to the right and quite high up, they've got their monitor, and it's a person who's kind of like, he's looking, like,
looking at the side.
It's clearly, it looks like he's daydreaming, but he's not daydreaming.
Yeah.
It looks like he's looking out the window, just wishing he was somewhere else.
Yeah, you must get a really cricked neck. But there's all of that, sort of the people who haven't quite got the view set up correctly, or the people who dial in from like their iPad, so you just see like the bottom side of their chin for most of the call, or the person who dials in from their walk when they're outside in the garden and they're just like wandering around, so the sound quality is terrible. But I mean, there's all these different people, and of course, let's be honest, that we will be one of these, or sort of some fusion of them all. I suppose the other one is the person with no video, who just kind of is just there, lurking.
The lurker.
Yeah.
And then when they pipe up, it's kind of, I kind of think, sorry, you think you have a right to speak? You're sitting there with no video on, and then all of a sudden saying like, well, Mark, I totally disagree. It's like, excuse me, Terry. You've just sat there for 30 minutes, not showing us your lovely, middle-aged face, and then all of a sudden you think you can just contest Mark's very well presented, detailed economic plan.
You have no authority, Terry. No authority at all. But
waiting room.
Well, exactly. But you have the people with no video. You have the kind of crazy, quirky, cool guy who's got some pretty zany backdrops going. Oh, here I am in front of the Golden Gate Bridge. All right, mate. Like, it's funny the first time, like, yeah,
Exactly.
okay, you're on a beach in Hawaii and actually your camera is not very good, so it's actually very glitchy, and you kind of think, yeah. But which one are you, Lazlo, if you were to sort of characterize your Zoom behavior?
So now, I would introduce a new character here, which is the Joker, and it's a bit unfortunate. God. Look, I don't like awkward silences, and above all, I don't like digital awkward silences. So in my company calls, when there's 25 faces just sitting there with the red microphone in the bottom left of their screens, all muted. Maybe our head of operations is talking about the plan for the next couple of weeks. I'll just chime in. I'll just do a little cheeky joke, and they're often very bad jokes. They're often very either terrible puns or just something which is just slightly awkward. And I kind of see a few people bobbing their heads in approval, laughing. But I'd say the majority of the time they bomb. But I can't help myself.
But the weird thing about, cracking jokes as well on Zoom is that, as you say, most people are muted. So even if, things have gone down really well, no one's actually going to hear any laughter, right? So every joke, by definition, if everyone's muted, goes down like a cold pint of sick. And you're just left there being like, oh, well, if in the person, you guys would have been all rolling all over the floor. I mean,
it's almost worse when one person is unmuted and they kind of give a half laugh. So you kind of say like, oh, what did the banana say across the road? Or splat. And the person goes kind of like, and you're sitting there going like, I wish there was actually total silence for that. Leave it to people's imaginations.
Well, it's like when something really important gets announced, or somebody says they've got promoted, or somebody gets engaged, or somebody's had a child, and then awkwardly everybody tries to show their sort of their congratulations, but they just clap in silence. It's completely bizarre. Everyone's there going,
or even worse, they just tap on the thumbs up emoji. So you got kind of 4 or 5 thumbs up, and it's kind of like these people. There's nothing less kind of exciting about 4 people just doing a little thumbs up in the corner of the screen after your company's just raised 5 million in venture funding.
But I totally get your views on the awkward silences. I mean, particularly at the beginning of the meeting, where I think, to be honest, people have got a lot better at it, where people just roll on in and they just sit there in silence. But certainly at the beginning, people were like, this is awkward. Like, what do I do? Do I sort of say something?
So bad.
They should actually Zoom. Do they have this? They should do some sort of elevator music. Some kind of lobby lounge music, like
So a couple of my colleagues have experimented with this, and before presentations, they'll have some kind of background music. One of them chose some kind of medieval inn music, so it's kind of like got this plucky, exactly this kind of lute. You kind of feel like you're in the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones, which for people who haven't seen it is
well, and then everybody gets
I mean, let's
muted.
Not ruin it for the viewers who for some reason haven't watched season 2.
Spoiler alert, everyone gets muted.
Well, Ed, I think that leads nicely to a segment which I'm going to repeat from last week, and I introduced last week the new fun little show called Lazlo's Listicles, which you will remember well because you kind of performed rather well.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this all week, actually. Here we go.
Very good. So the list in question this week is called the 10 most awkward things about video calls. And I will eliminate some for your benefit. So there were 10, but I'm going to eliminate one which is called the pre-chat, which is talking about awkward pre-chat. I'm going to eliminate one called regrettable background noises, because we've already talked about toddlers screaming. And I'll eliminate a final one, which is called the invisible man/woman, the participant who mysteriously keeps their video turned off, leaving a black square where their face should be. Now, with that in mind, with those 3 eliminations, I want you to try and guess 2 of the things that feature on this list. And you've got three tries. I'm going to be harsher because I think it's easier than last week. So hit me. What do you think are the most awkward things to happen?
I'm just trying to sort of cast my mind back to the hundreds, if not thousands, of calls I've had over the past year to think about the real kind of toe curlers. And I would say that the openings are always what get me the most. But I suppose one particularly awkward point can often come when somebody's connection is just completely fried, and therefore they're trying to make quite a serious point, but their audio keeps cutting in or out, or their video is like chopping and they keep kind of jumping in and out of the meeting. Is that one of them?
Very good. So the dodgy Wi-Fi delay is
Yes.
number 2 on the list, and this is...
Oh, yeah, but you're right, though. The delay is actually... I didn't quite nail that, so I should have been more specific. So the delay is wonderful, and my internet connection is terrible, and so quite often I'll be on a call, and yeah, it's just ridiculous. Like, I'll just say something, and then, 30 seconds later, I'll hear, yeah, okay, no, interesting point. And
Yeah.
I'll have already made another one, or more likely, I'm not sure I quite agree with that, Ed.
Yeah, well, I mean, you say sometimes you're on a call, and you do this. Well, I'll just tell the listeners that quite often Ed on Earth Calling recordings is doing this. And, it's kind of like he's tuning in from Kamchatka and we've got this 15-second delay between things that we're saying.
Or Alaska, perhaps, with the very crappy internet, which is a bit of a throwback to our Netflix episode.
Yes,
look it up.
Indeed, look it up.
Again, we weave an interconnected web of references. That's the beauty of Earth Calling.
It is, and this will of course be reflected in the naming of the folders which we have on the hard drive, just to make sure the aliens have an easy time connecting the dots. We'll link through some, we'll have some hyperlinks linking through the folders with our complex Ethernet.
It is a complex labyrinth, but we will lay the crumbs like Ariadne. For some reason, this has quite a Greek theme, this episode.
Very Greek. Narcissus, yes. Ariadne. You lost me at Nar. Right. Yeah. So the dodgy Wi-Fi delay, you're right. It's awful. Someone is speaking. They're talking about something very important. And all of a sudden, they...
Two trailer park girls go rounding outside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So very good. One out of your 3 attempts done, and you hit the bullseye.
Okay, so is there something around screen sharing, and they have like an awkward window open? So, let me just share my screen, and then you see that actually, Sarah's been looking up, divorce counselors or something.
Flights to Istanbul. Divorce counselors would be good. Maybe looking up divorce counselors in Istanbul. No, unfortunately, that is not on our list. But
come on.
I do like the thought.
Okay, well that should be in there because that's like super awkward. How about something around getting people's names wrong because they're not shown on their... No, because you normally have the name.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not going to lie, it's tough. But such is the nature of the brutal game that is Lazlo's Listicles, by the way. It doesn't promise, an easy journey.
No, it's tough. It's tough. Again, I feel like Odysseus, kind of, or Hercules.
Right,
even with
okay, Ed.
challenge.
That's quite enough on the Greek bloody mythology front. Yeah. And then 2 more were the long-winded wrap-up. The challenge of ending a call when you have nowhere else to be. So saying I've got to run doesn't really cut it when, everyone knows.
This is great. This is great.
Yeah.
So I would actually just have a little pause here and talk about the Zoom quiz, which or Zoom drinks, which were very much a feature of Lockdown 1.0 in March 2020, and it was great. Everyone was hopping on House Party, everyone's having a work drink. It's like, come on guys, we'll do like a little Zoom quiz. And at the end of those quizzes, there'd be that terrible moment where it's sort of 8:30 p.m. on a Friday, and there are people who just don't want to be there. They want to go and drown their sorrows alone in their flat, and they can't get away from the call because, as you say, there is literally nowhere that you could legally be. So you have to say, I just need to...
I'm really sorry, I need to pop out for my one exercise of the day for 15 minutes. It's like, but Alan, you went for a jog this morning. It's like, oh, no, that was for essential items.
Yeah, that was my essential shopping for the week. But you did that yesterday, Alan. Yeah. So, and there's always that scramble, I don't know whether you find, but once one person has sort of decided that they've got the courage to leave the Zoom quiz, then everybody falls
Absolutely.
like dominoes, and it's almost like being left holding the bomb when you're kind of left at the end of the call with the very keen...
Yeah, Sandra.
Or kind of Michael, who loves the quiz and is very keen to continue chatting. Cool. Well, I think... Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this week. As ever, please do give us a like and review on Apple Podcasts, or give us a download on Spotify. And if you head on over to Instagram, you will find us at earth_calling_pod. One other thing I'd say is, a couple of you have been in touch about things that you'd like us to talk about. Please do all send in whatever suggestions you have. We are keen to cover as much important content and add it to our bunker as possible. So feel free to get in touch. Slide into our DMs on Insta. And what are we looking at next week, Lazlo?
Yes, well, next week we charge onto the platform that pioneered UGC, otherwise known as
user-generated content, the UGC.
UGC, chanted no one, and in doing so gave birth to the blogger and the vlogger, and that platform is of course YouTube. So please do join us next week as we'll be filtering through the many different videos out there. And as always, thanks so much for tuning in. Earth out.